Yeah, okay.
Can someone check? Because I think we all get it at a little different time.
It says it's now streaming live on YouTube.
Okay. All right, let's go.
Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for August 11th, 2020. The 10 a.m. session. No public testimony is permitted during the review session. The first case is 2018-198A, 85 Trenton Court, Staten Island.
Okay, we last heard this in December. It was adjourned twice since. A site plan was provided along with an argument about not providing a sidewalk. The site plan is confusing relative to that argument since it seems to indicate alignment with an existing sidewalk on the west side of Trenton Court, which according to the photos provided does not represent field conditions. This is true also of the site plan approved by City Planning in 2016. According to the site plan, the 11-foot strip of grass and trees along the curb line are on city property. So that is effectively a curb, though the people don't know that they're not trespassing when they walk on those trees and grass. The site plan also ignores the width of the street on the east side of Trenton, which measures 37.8 feet curb to curb and allows room for on-street parking. The 60-foot record width of the street doesn't end anywhere on the site plan. It just says there's an arrow just pointing into infinity for the other side of the 60 feet. So I'd like to know, how will street parking work if the narrow point opposite the house is between approximately 20 and 25 feet wide? This was a concern of the community board as well. You have 3 cars parking in tandem for a 2-family house. In some districts in Staten Island, that's not actually even permitted. I don't know if it's permitted in this district. You have to assume, though, the preference will be on-street parking for at least one of the families, because you've got 3 cars parked in tandem, and that's a lot of keys to be taking off racks and pulling out cars, and that's only if I'm letting you drive my car. According to the tax map, the full width of Trenton is city-owned, so I think it should be paved to allow for on-street parking and clear passage of cars to the end of the dead end at a minimum. We're only talking about paving it in front of the 50-foot wide subject property. So that's not a big hardship, and that would make the Trenton Court the full width all the way down to the dead end. And I don't think it's a big ask. Okay, Commissioner Shanda?
I was satisfied with the revised application with regards to the sidewalk. I'm okay with, in this particular case, not to have a sidewalk just for this frontage, since none of the other properties have, and this is the only remaining site that will be developed along this dead-end street. So I'm okay with this application.
Commissioner Otley-Brown?
I agree with the vice chair about the sidewalks, because it would look kind of strange to just have a little sidewalk to nowhere in front of this home.
Commissioner Sheta?
Thank you, Chair. I'm okay with the sidewalk not installed, but I would like to get some explanation, some reasoning for why. Just amend maybe the cover letter and put down some text explaining why it's not feasible. It's not enough to just say the owner believes that's not needed and it's not feasible. And the other thing is they said that it would call for some tree removal. If they can provide a plan with locations of these trees to be removed, that would be helpful for us too. But I'm okay with it as it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Commissioner Shibeta.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to add with regard to the GCL 36 issue here. I do believe that this would seem much more like a self-created hardship in that it seems like they subdivided the lot so that they could build this development, and that would create a broad properties issue because they do have access through their adjoining lot that is co-owned. I believe had the same owner at some time relatively recently. I'm not sure if it's still co-owned. That was, I believe, a question I asked at the last hearing. That being said, Chair, you stated that this is a small ask, and I think that's relevant. This is a two-story, two-family unit. This isn't a large, this isn't an actual large development. And under that, I don't have an objection to this application.
So does anyone have an opinion about the width of the roadbed, following the width of the roadbed so that you can park cars since there's tandem parking? I wasn't really talking about the sidewalk. I mean, they made an argument for no sidewalk, but I was talking about the fact that in front of the house is only 20 foot wide, so you couldn't have a car parked there. Whereas the house right next door has cars parked right in front of it in a 37 and a half foot curb to curb width. So there's plenty of room for parking. And you definitely will get on-street parking from from however many units this is, 2-unit house.
I have a question. Typically, applicants, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember if that's the situation. If let's
took
say
my
there's a
photo
type-
up.
Hello?
Okay.
If there is if an applicant is proposing to develop a frontage of a street, are they required to improve the entire street bed that's fronting along the street, or the portion of the street bed, like half a portion of the street bed that is fronting on their?
So
How
they're
does that
required to pave to 50% of the street bed, but that's a different thing. In this case, you have a GCL waiver. You know, normally those street beds are 60 foot wide, right? Here we don't have that. So and there's an assumption that someone else will improve the other side. We also don't have that because normally that's how it works, right? But I'm talking about the fact that you have 3 cars in tandem in a 2-family house, and you're not going to be able to have parking on the street because it's only a 20-foot wide access way, which is the minimum width for 1 car, right? Well, we see that it's the minimum width. So that's why I'm suggesting. Commissioner Otley Brown's hand is up.
I think it's a reasonable request to widen that street because it'll also allow better turning and maneuverability should you need to make a U-turn.
Anybody else? Thank you. All right, next one.
New case, item number 18, 2018-30A, 40 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn. This is a sign case.
Okay. Interesting case. This application has been postponed twice. So this is the initial hearing, and as a reminder, we're in a review session. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of this teleconference hearing with dial-in to officials. The map showing distances to the park that was provided by the appellant are very unclear, especially as to the actual location of the sign and the measured distances. The cyclomedia measurement that was provided by Department of Buildings shows the sign 184 feet from McLaughlin Park. I'd like to know how appellant responds to that because that's within 200 feet of an arterial, of the park. I'd like to have clarified that the sign is also visible from the park, which is one of the criteria. The responses to by the appellant to the second notice of comments I found quite odd in that the appellant not to provide the information asked for by our project managers. So as a result, the hearing drags out longer because we didn't get the submissions requested by the project manager It's not good practice not to follow the requests. Justification for the sign as grandparented is very unclear. There are exhibits provided without clear explanation for their purpose. The statement of facts should have taken us systematically through the argument and the proofs to support the argument. So I'm having to rely on Department of Buildings account as it is much easier with photographic support. Department of Buildings final determination states that the reason for the revocation of the sign permit is the sign's proximity to McLaughlin Park and some indication that the sign became accessory at one point, although that isn't at all clear, like at what point, when did the accessory use stop, none of that. In appellant submission, it does not specifically address either of the assertions in that determination. But in DOB's determination, it appears to be saying that because the sign is within 200 feet of the park, it needs to be removed. However, I'm not sure, that's something to discuss, that 42-55A requires and 4255C requires that removal, and 4255C doesn't apply to signs near parks. The determination doesn't get into any further arguments about the applicability of 4255A as requiring removal of a sign. In its recent submission to the board and in response to appellant's 3 submissions since 2018, Department of Buildings includes materials that further research the issues, including the introduction of a 1940 zoning resolution amendment prohibiting advertising near parks, a New York Times article about the acquisition in 1944 of the subject building by the Howard Clothing Company, a fuzzy photograph of the building in the distance from 1945, which seems accurate in terms of time period because of the cars in the photo. All that the DOB claim, that the DOB claims doesn't show the sign. A clear 1949 photo with the sign structure in place, and a list from a 1948 Department of Buildings docket book referring to location, quote, 119. You have to squint at the 1949 photo to see the Howard Clothing sign on the sign structure. But apparently that's when Howard Clothing more or less established at that location. So in fairness, appellant obviously hasn't seen these new arguments, and they obviously weren't part of the final determination. And this is often what happens with DOB. They keep digging into the sign to find more arguments to do away with it. And I actually think that's unfair relative to how final determination works. But the reality is, if the appellant doesn't address those issues before us, and we were said to allow the sign to continue, then DOB would raise those issues in the future and the appellant would be right back here. So I don't see any way around it. So appellant really does need to have an opportunity to respond. And I would say this time they need to respond much more carefully than they did in the last 3 submissions to the board. It's not just getting us papers, it's actually making a clear argument supported by documentation that we can follow along easily, and not just assume that by throwing stuff at us, we'll understand what the argument is. The appellant's argument so far seems to be that the sign was grandparented as of 2001, but I question whether that the 2001 test does require compliance with 4255, and they have to establish that it complies with 4255. 4255A states that an existing advertising sign within 200 feet of and in view of a public park may not be structurally altered, relocated, or reconstructed. So that's what we need to know about this sign. And I see 4255A as allowing an existing advertising sign within 200 feet of a park to remain. Otherwise, it wouldn't say, don't structurally alter it, right? Just don't structurally alter it and it can remain, right? So, and I also didn't see anywhere in either submissions a discussion of the applicability of section 4258 for signs that are erected prior to the year 2000. So I'm not sure whether that's relevant because the sign arguably grandparents by 1968. I think this may be the first time in a sign case that I've seen anyway, that DOB has invoked section 21B of the 1940 zoning resolution for pre-61 advertising signs. Though we rarely discuss signs near parks, and I'd like to know if there have been other signs near parks cases that we have considered. So DOB should provide us with those. And our council, if we can just help the commissioners understand how we've looked at signs near parks. We often consider the pre-68 status of an advertising sign located within 200 feet of an arterial pursuant to section 42-55C. So we look at the pre-68 status for sure of signs near arterials. Do we do the same for parks? Because DOB seems to now be saying that every single sign permitted prior to 1961 was illegal unless it can establish a permit prior to 1940. That's what I'm reading from them. And I think that approach may conflict directly with section 42-55C that states any advertising sign erected prior to 1968 within 660 feet of an arterial and a park and of an arterial. And so I'm confused that they may be applying this 1940 regulation arbitrarily, like not consistently. I don't read 4255A, as I said. DOB is also measuring the distance to the park from the lighting, not the sign itself. And I don't think that's fair. The visibility is as to text, not lamps. You could have lamps on the roof, whether or not associated with a sign. So if it falls into the just outside of 200 feet, if you measure to the face of the sign, then it's not one that's affected by the 200 feet within the distance of a park, but it is subject to the size restraints once you get past that 200-foot distance. We also need more on when the Howard Close sign was replaced with advertising and when the building was no longer occupied by Howard Clothes. I actually found a blog or something from a descendant of the Howard clothing family who was writing all about how proud he was that he's a descendant of this family, and he neglects to indicate when they move out of that building. Also, we need the appellant to provide a better record of the buildings and the signs history. So those are my comments. Commissioner or Vice Chair Shanda.
Thank you. So what I actually thought this was interesting in the sense that in appellant's application form, it clearly states the appeals application is limited to whether DOB correctly found that the sign does not comply with ZR 4255C. And when I read the regulations of 4255C and then refer to the City Planning Commission report, 4255C was specifically for arterial highway. It really was doesn't seem to be applying for parks, though 4255 overall is for parks, public parks and arterial highway. C is specifically referring to the way the language is written. It doesn't refer to public park in a highlighted way as it is in the rest of the text. It says any advertising sign erected, structurally altered, relocated, or reconstructed prior to June 1st, 1968 within 660 feet of the nearest edge of the right-of-way of any arterial highway. And and 2 also refers to only arterial highway. There's no reference to public parks. So, and if you go to the City Planning Commission report, this particular revision was done in response to issues that were, I'm actually scrolling through the City Planning Commission report right now. And the problem area was that the signs in the manufacturing districts were basically changing from business signs to accessory signs to advertisement signs. And specifically, it was becoming problematic along the highways. So this text was this modification to the text was done in response to that. So with that said, and then looking at the DOB's letter, DOB was referring not to 4255C, but it was referring to 4255B, which A and B. And all of DOB's argument is centered around 4255A, which is within 200 feet of arterial highway or a public park. B, beyond 200 feet for such arterial highway or public park. So that is there. However, DOB in its initial, pardon me, sorry, excuse me. I've got this allergy and all of a sudden my eyes start burning. Can someone else take over? My eyes are.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
cannot
Oh,
read.
it
I'm
sounds
sorry.
like our hearing room.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Commissioner Otley Brown.
Yeah, I actually had a similar question as the vice chair did concerning which was more applicable. 4255A and B, I believe, is what's more applicable here because we are dealing with the advertising sign within 200 feet of a public park. And I think that this sign actually is in violation of both A or B, because even if it wasn't within 200 feet, like you said, if you measured it from the sign face and it was a little over 200 feet, it's still way larger than the one additional square foot that you could get for every linear feet further than 200 feet. At 3,300 square feet, it certainly is in violation of both A or B. So that's where I'm coming from in that. I think those are the applicable sections. I thought that DOB was very good in researching, the history of Howard's Close and proving that Howard's Close, when they moved in I believe they moved in 1948 and installed a business sign and proved that there was no advertising sign established in this space. And so I don't even know how they could prove their establishment to even be able to get to the point as to whether or not 4255A or B is applicable here.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was a business sign until it sold, and my research of the deed showed it kind of switched hands back and forth a couple of times in the late 80s, but finally sold to Flatbush Realty in 1991. So at that point, to me, it ceases being an accessory business sign.
No, it ceases being an advertising.
I mean, it ceases being an accessory business sign and then started up as an advertising sign.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Oh, and as to your point, when you said that DOB has this habit of giving their final determination, and then as time is going on, they pile on, oh, and we found this, and oh, and we found this. While it might not seem fair, in the case of this appellant in particular, who has a habit of postponing hearings over and over again for sign cases, it's like, oh, well, you keep postponing. Yeah. So if in the interim, while you're postponing and kicking it down the road 6 months each time, DOB finds additional information to support their case, well, they could have had the hearing when it was originally supposed to be put on. So I'm not sympathetic to them.
Mm-hmm.
And those are my comments.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Shanda, do you want to continue or are you still?
Yeah, I'm much better. Thank you. Actually, Commissioner Otley Brown picked up from where I left it, and I would have concluded in the same manner. Okay. So I'm not going to be repetitive.
Mhm. Okay, and Commissioner Sheta?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what is said about DOB is doing much better job on this application. Uh, I believe they were successful to like streamline the evidence that this sign existed after probably like a decade after 1940. I have two main points that I'm gonna raise. The first one is DOB is asserting that the sign, they consider the sign uh, as an accessory sign, and the reason for that, I believe, because the material advertised was related to Howard clauses. My question to them is, please confirm or explain. So, in other words, are you saying it was an accessory because the advertised material was related to one of the occupants of the building? Uh, that was the first point.
Can I just, Commissioner Sheta, can I just answer that quickly? Because it was hard to see in the photographs. You really had to look hard. It looks like that 1948 or 49 photo is just of the structure of the sign. It isn't. It's a structure that's holding individual pin-mounted letters, and they say Howard Clothes. So, and then you can see sort of later photographs of Howard Clothes if you do general online research. So that's what they're referring to. Is, to my knowledge, they're not referring to like a billboard showing a suit. Okay.
Okay, the second point is, I believe the applicant need to respond to the material and the issues raised by the DOB regarding when the sign was installed, the status of the time of the sign after the time it was installed. So the applicant owe like a really brief response to that. The third point is, it's a question to DOB. Have you gained access to the photos submitted or presented in your submission based on which you concluded that the sign was installed after 1940 at the time that you sent the recession notice to the applicant? And if yes, have you made the applicant aware of these photos?
Okay. And Commissioner Shabeta, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like the applicant and the DOB to, if they can, agree on certain facts, and of which some of them would be the distance to the park. Do they agree how far this is from the park? If they don't agree, by how much do they disagree? And they have to provide evidence of it. As the chair said, is this visible from the park? Do they agree on whether or not this is visible from the park? Photos would be helpful. I believe that the removal of signs by 4255 A and C, I think that needs to be briefed, whether or not that there is a history of that and what supporting case law. I do agree with much of what was stated by my colleagues, particularly also what was stated by Commissioner Otley Brown. It seems like the appellant is attempting to delay or muddy for as long as possible rather than actually litigate this. But if they do want to litigate this, they should be prepared to make concise responses to the arguments of the DOB, including the new arguments, but that these new arguments are arguments that the appellant had time to answer. Was this erected after 1940 prohibition? Would this have been accessory during the period that Howard's cloth was there? I don't think that because of the history here of these two adjournments and what this seems like, I don't think that I think that the next hearing should be whether a hearing that we close and decide on. I don't think it's this looks very clearly to me as delay and muddy rather than provide a response and actually litigate this. And I think it's clear from the refusal to respond to the notice of comments. This doesn't seem like a good faith appeal.
And Commissioner Sheta, you have your hand up.
Yeah, regarding the feasibility from the park, I see that the sign is directly in front of the park, but I do have a philosophical point. If we gonna measure the 200 feet from the face of the sign, should we measure them to the point in the park where the sign becomes feasible, or it should be to the edge of the park no matter what?
I think you measure it as a standard to the edge of the park. That's how we measure to the arterials, right? Not at the point at which it becomes visible, but wherever as the crow flies there, I think. Yeah, I think, but actually, counsel, our general counsel, Kurt, please, that we had a case about measurement to arterial. Maybe you could help us with that.
So in 121 Barrack Street, the board was measuring to the edge of the arterial, and the applicable language is within 200 feet of an arterial highway or a public park. So it does seem that this would be a similar standard in terms of measuring to the edge of the park, because the within view portion is a separate part of the text.
Even let's say if because of an obstruction like an adjacent building or something, and it's shitting to the park, if you take the line of sight, let's say you have the first 50 feet or 20 feet of the park, the strip parallel to that obstructing building is not that the sign from this strip is not feasible. Your opinion is to measure from the edge of the park no matter what.
Yes, and I believe that this might be similar to the case with the exit roadway from I think Holland Tunnel, where it had actually curved around, and so the visibility was in a different area, but you're still measuring.
Okay.
The measurement was still to the edge of the highway.
Right. And it's because the language in the text doesn't say from a point where it is visible from the arterial or from the park. It says a distance of 200 feet and is visible. So anywhere you stand in the park, if it's visible and it's a distance of 200 feet, you're out. That's the way we've been interpreting it. It's the simplest way to read it. Otherwise, you know, they plant a tree and then all of a sudden it's not visible anymore. Does that make it legal? Or they cut the tree down that's been there for 60 years, all of a sudden it makes it illegal. Or the same for a building in the way, right? So, yeah, Commissioner Shanda.
Well, in this case, there is a building, 21-story building that is coming up on the block that is between the McLaughlin, the park, and the subject site. And this 21-story building is going to block the view of this signboard from the park and from any of the streets, and also from Flatbush Extension. So it will be interesting to see what happens to the sign. I'm just throwing it out there. And I had a similar question when I saw the construction going up, and I looked at the zoning biz documentation for the nature of the building and what is being proposed. And this is a question for DOB. In that case, when a building is coming up right in front of the site, which is going to completely going to block the line of sight, I think the answer is still yes, but I want DOB to confirm it, how the zoning would be interpreted. And I think our general counsel can also confirm that. Would you still be measuring 200 feet from the edge of the park to the sign with a building that will be blocking the view?
Well, yeah. It sounds like the issue would be that it would no longer meet the within view prong. And
right.
So the measurement is just irrelevant at that point.
Right.
Okay.
But I don't know if that the second statement is true, just because the direct measurement, you know, when you just go perpendicular to the building, right to the park, you get 200 feet or so, right? Nonetheless, when you walk down McLaughlin Park to the, whichever way that is, I don't know if that's west. Then the sign will be visible because you'll clear the view of the building, probably. you'll clear the tall building that's being constructed. So you need, because the park is very long, right? So anywhere along Cathedral Plaza, the Cathedral Place, you're going to arguably see the sign at some point.
Okay.
Right?
There is another question that I would like DOB for its record to clarify. In its, where is it? In a letter dated, I think 7/19/2016, it was a notice to resend. In that, DOB had quoted that this subject application did not meet 4255C because it was abutting Flatbush extension. And I want DOB to kind of respond to it as to why it then moved away from that. And in its response to this application, it is referring to 4455A and B. Also, I want the appellant to look into it and identify where does the Flatbush extension starts, and does Flatbush extension count as an arterial highway as defined in the zoning resolution?
So if you look at the earliest submission from appellant in response to that DOB rescission letter, and it was the submission to DOB, not to us.
Right.
The appellant actually, at that time, the applicant for permit, actually explains that its proximity is to this extension where you can still get off the extension and go into the general street system. So therefore, it doesn't count as an arterial. And that's the standard that this board has also used to decide when you're on the arterial, no way out. You missed your last chance to get off the tunnel or whatever.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So DOB seems to have accepted that.
Okay.
And that's why they didn't pursue it and came up with a new idea. Okay. All right. Anybody else on this? I don't know. Yeah, we did. All right, let's move on.
2017-34 BZ, 311 Adams Street, Staten Island.
Just want to remind that there is a new architect on this project, and that architect should participate in all the hearings. And I heard this morning from our project manager, Jella Prenga, that she wasn't sure that the counsel for the applicant could get the architect. There's very little excuse. It's like you're calling from your kitchen table, or you could be calling from France. I mean, there's really no excuse not to participate in these hearings short of having no electricity. So yeah, Kurt. Okay.
It does appear that the architect and engineer have both registered.
Okay.
So they will be
Okay.
in attendance.
All right, thank you, because that's what I heard this morning. Okay, thanks. The plans were revised, but no bubble drawings were provided. Project managers should not be accepting submissions without bubble drawings and cover letters, and applicants should absolutely not be filing without them. I don't understand why we're having trouble still getting these bubble drawings and cover letters. The note stating non-compliance with section 64-61 is still on the drawings, which has to do with mitigation requirements where you're lifting a building high. There is a DOB objection for that requirement, so the scope of the variance has increased to include that. 64-61 is a height mitigation requirement for houses lifted above base flood elevation. This house's first floor is 9 feet above grade. And even though understanding, because there's such a little front yard, it's hard to comply to the letter with the mitigation requirements. some effort has to be made to mitigate the impact of the elevation, even if it doesn't comply with the actual strict terms of the text. So the architect has to go back and look at how to handle that kind of mitigation. You have lots of different options. Porches, stair direction change, raised front yard, trees or shrubs at least 3 feet high. Some of those, and 2 mitigation types are required when you lift the building this high. Applicant's counsel submitted a map showing the site is outside of the special coastal risk district. But I have to say, I don't know what the significance of that is because they didn't tell us relative to the waiver that's described on the drawings. The only thing I can think of is applicant is responding to a comment that we made last time about WRP review for being in the coastal zone. We need a lateral section. None was provided, only longitudinal was provided. All the balconies, the house has many kind of like Juliet balconies. They all need to be shown on the sections. The sections need to go from property line to property line to show the relationship, well, more than property line, from sidewalk to sidewalk, so that we can see the relationship to street and side yards to make sure that the balconies are not extending over the property line. And they need to show the length of a typical car in the driveways to be sure that the car is not extending onto the sidewalk. They need to label the elevations by directional coordinates, not left and right. We see so many of these left and right elevations. I don't know where this comes from. You would never be allowed to do that in school. The right elevation, the thing that's called right elevation doesn't show the balconies that appear on the Adams Avenue frontage in the plan. They need to show all balconies on the site plan and show property lines on all floor plans to make clear again whether balconies are extending past the property line. They need to indicate balconies above, the floor above in dashed lines on the floor plans. They need to show the depth of the balconies in the plans, and the depth of the balcony on the section bears no relationship to the depth shown on the plan. So I don't even understand how you do a drawing like that, frankly. This is CAD drawings, they're coordinated. I don't get it. So the house is 36 feet above grade elevation, which is tall, and there is a blank sidewall facing the neighbor. That sidewall should be softened up and not be a vinyl siding as is shown. Vinyl siding to me is not far away from the forbidden exterior foam insulation because it does not wear. You damage it and it breaks. And it's very hard to fix, and it also looks bad. So again, not a durable material. And then looking at that, I see the forbidden exterior insulation foam material being used on the front of the project. No projects that come before the BSA can have this EFIS material. The idea of a building receiving a variance is that it should contribute positively to the neighborhood and not become an eyesore due to poor material choices. The roof, then to go on, the roof is needlessly tall and needs to be brought down. I thought we discussed this at the last hearing. It seems like it was brought down a little bit, but it's still needlessly tall. It's trying to do sort of a French chateau in the Loire Valley on this tiny little lot. There isn't room. We also discussed the maximum height measurement in Datum and stated that you can't measure off of 9 feet above curb level pursuant to 64-334 unless there are mitigating elements under 64-61, which there are not. Therefore, the perimeter wall height is measured off of freeboard FRCE pursuant to 64-131 to the greater of 21 feet, or off grade to 26 feet. I think the drawings show that, but I want to clarify because there was nothing in the cover letter to confirm that method of measurement. We also asked for clarification on survey curb levels, which we didn't receive. The cover letter states there is an attic plan. There isn't. The section shows a greater than 8-foot high floor to ceiling rafter and then cross bracing at 4 foot 11 inches to the bottom of the bracing. So we're not granting any floor area increases. The drawings need to clearly indicate that any area in the attic must comply with the definition of floor area in R31. And our resolution must state that BSA takes no position on whether the attic is shown on the drawings is floor area, and no waivers are being granted to allow an increase beyond what is permitted as of right. The project is not being built to the full allowance of as of right, but I wish the architect were, let's say, more honest about what's going on in the attic, because there is floor area to spare, and this idea of the 4 foot 11 rafter, which is located to be just under the 5 feet, so it doesn't count as floor area, is suspect at best, given that you've got very high ceiling in the attic, which I think needs to come down. Waivers for the parking and curb cut under section 25.622 and 25.632 have also been requested. We had asked to investigate putting the parking under the house, since the house is lifted high above grade. A study was provided, but none to show it the parking access from Adams Street, which would move the curb cut away from the intersection. The study assumes the building design is immutable. That's not how design works. The stair and entry condition could be modified to accommodate the parking. And I want to add that the curb cut, as shown, is now dangerously close to the crossing, and I wouldn't be comfortable granting this waiver of the curb cut restrictions without DOT's input. The curb cut's much wider than what's permitted in the district. Furthermore, tandem parking is permitted in the district, and one waiver is to allow parking to be located between the street line and the street wall. So you could eliminate a part of the waiver by having tandem parking. I don't see why you can't accomplish eliminating the parking located between the street line and the street wall on inside the building using the tandem parking. The curb cut the maximum allowable curb cut width is 10 feet. And the curb cut is not centered on the driveway, as is required by that section in the zoning resolution. And there's no information about the relationship to the adjacent curb cut, which is also a requirement in, I think it's 25.622 and 25.632. We had asked that the proposed drawings clearly show where the proposed waivers are in yards, and they still don't do that. There are now 6 waivers sought for this project. I think the architect has to work harder to reduce them or mitigate their effects. And I do have to say, we are essentially looking at the same project filed by a prior architect without any changes other than a slight reduction in roof height. So none of the changes are responding to, there's no changes to respond to board comments at the 2 hearings on this since the first hearing in January 2019. I'm really disturbed by the idea that you hire a new architect, presumably because the other one's either not being paid or had enough of this client or something. And then the new architect comes in and redraws exactly the same project on CAD, because the prior set was done by hand, without thinking of anything, without doing any new design to respond to our comments. I'm not okay with that attitude. I think it's dismissive of what the board is trying to do in understanding that this site is a difficult site, but the architect has to work with us, and otherwise I'm not okay with this project. So there's also a plumbing sheet that's included in the plan set that should be taken out. We don't look at plumbing. And we asked for this to be changed twice before. The floor area is described as net. There's no such thing as net floor area in zoning calculations. We either have gross or zoning floor area. And I don't, so we can't even get a simple note like that corrected. So let's just say I'm peeved. Okay, Vice Chair Shanda.
Thank you. So you have stated most of the things. I actually am also a little surprised that with so many changes in the architect, nothing seems to have moved. And this is a note to the council for this application. They need to let the property owner know just changing architect is not going to make us change our viewpoint. Our viewpoint remains unaffected, and those need to be responded to regardless of who they retain as an architect. And also, the statement of fact does not respond to the increased waivers. That needs to be updated. It may be a little premature because we still are at stage 1, where the application has not been fully laid out. I think at our very initial hearing, we all had kind of, if I seem to recall, we all kind of felt like, yes, this is the kind of site where 7021 works, where, you know, this is a very narrow site with a lot of limitations, and it warrants waivers of some of the zoning requirement. However, it doesn't mean every aspect of the zoning regulation, and the applicant needs to do a better job to walk us through why each one of those sections do not work in this site in various whatever alternatives. And this is the best alternative that would result in the minimum need that would satisfy the very basic minimal need of the property owner, and is therefore also a minimum ask. I don't think the applicant has been able to walk us through that. I am though sympathetic towards the need for a waiver of the 6461 as I see the site, but they need to walk us through that and show why 6461 as regulation requires will not work. And if there is an option that comes out of it that seems to work, they need to show us that they can make it work. And if some element of the modification of that is required, for example, I'm thinking of the porch, if that some modification of the porch is required, then say so. But you need to walk us through all of those exercises to show how you went through the elimination process of each one of these sections and why it could not work. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Otley-Brown.
I agree with everything that both of you had said, actually. If you actually go to this site, this lot, because it's partially in the map street, is just so tiny that the mere thought of putting a house this tall and this bulky on there, it's impossible to imagine, because it's going to be so disruptive to me, to the character. And I don't want to add anything else, really drag this on, except to say that it's still not clear what the front yards are.
What the required front yards, or what front yards?
No, what the front yards that they're proposing. It kind of, it's not in the zoning analysis. I couldn't find it. I see one at 0 feet, and I can't tell what the other one is, which is the one I think on the long depth of the building, because it's going into the street, but they don't really put it anywhere what the actual footage is.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Sheta.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to be repetitive. I'm not going to be repeating the comments about the right and left, nor the height of the building. But I do have something from the last hearing that I didn't talk about it until I kind of ran some numbers. It's a structural concern. If you look at the section on page 8 in the PDF, you see where it says storage only to the left, and then the parking for the 2 cars. I just see one bearing wall that's going down all the way to the footing, and it's supporting the building above. And if you look at the joist running over that wall, it's kind of cantilevered. this is kind of a cantilever from like a short span, less than probably 8 feet, and it's going out another 8 feet. I thought about this like it's not a cantilever. Probably they are using an edge beam, like all the way at the edge of the building where it says second floor, you see that drop thing. I'm not sure if a drop beam could be designed to withstand 3 floors. It's kind of tough for me to let this go like that. The span for this beam, if you go back to the plan view, let's say page 4, second floor, or even page 3, the span is about almost 18 feet or 17 feet and a half. This is really long span for a wood framed structure. And this beam is not just carrying that portion that I showed, it's a cantilever. It's carrying the third floor roof, I'm sorry, flooring or framing, the second floor framing, and in addition to that, the roof and the snow load. So I would like them to, just to prove that we alerted them, point to that drop beam and write this: drop beam to be designed to withstand loads from above. And make sure you write this in clear. And if I'm the one who's preparing these drawings, I would even box it and make it bold. So you alert the builder or whoever is gonna build this building that this beam is not a joke. It's not a regular 2x8 joist. It's a beam that's spanning 18 feet almost, and it's carrying a three floors on top of it. So it's kind of a, its function is very similar to the concrete wall at the edge of the building.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, any other last minute comments on this? Okay, thank you.
No,
Next. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Shabeta.
Sorry you went on so long. Commissioner Shiv.
I'm gonna make believe that didn't hurt my feelings, Chair. Most of my notes have been stated. I just want to add, this is a 2017 case, a docket. We sent a dismissal letter in 2018. It's had 4 adjournments, maybe the last of which we can say is COVID related. And it seems to be ignoring much of what we asked. Our concerns with height, our concerns with the character of the community. There's 16 letters from community members, and I think all but 1 are opposed to it because of this very reason. I think that the applicant needs to either seriously address what we've stated and the concerns of the community, or let this case go.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. You know, and just to put that in perspective, we were told there was a new architect, so we give them a break a little bit to bring in a new architect. But there is a point. Let's see. It says, I'm just looking for when the new architect. So in October, the adjournment was requested, and we heard in January that the owner would engage a new architect. So it's kind of like up until October, there were 3 adjournments through October. And those were arguably because they were having problems with their architect. I mean, I don't know, because it's not fair to the architect. I don't know.
But as you stated, the proposal seems the same.
Yeah,
So
I would. Yeah, I agree.
If it was different, then, you know, hey, we could start fresh. Everyone can understand what it's like to hire someone who's not representing you appropriately. But it seems as if that's not the issue here.
Right. And I think that what I should have said also was that the owner has to attend the hearing, because it may be that the owner is unaware of everything that's going on, or the owner is insisting, do it like this, and otherwise I'm not going to pay you, kind of thing. And so the owner needs to have the riot act read. The building's too tall. I'd say that's the main thing. Even though there's no waiver required for the height, there's waivers required for everything else. And there are too many waivers. So yeah, they thought they came to a limitless well, and they didn't. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Next.
Okay, that concludes the public review session for August 11th, 2020, 10 a.m. We'll now commence with the public hearing. So the first case is item number 17, 2018-198A, 85 Trenton Court, Staten Island.
Good morning, Todd Dale for the applicant.
Morning. Tony? Oh, we don't need to be sworn
No
in.
swear in for an
It's an A case, yeah.
Yep, okay.
That's my delay, apologies. So I did listen to review session, and with respect to the comments, just so I can more clearly understand, one of the questions regarding the paving, it's my understanding it's that what I would call a notch at the end of Trenton, that area that's across from the home, is that the concern about the improvement of the street? There was discussion about that.
No, so just to clarify, there was first a discussion about the home itself having a sidewalk. And then you made the argument it shouldn't have a sidewalk because it's sort of a sidewalk, as Commissioner Ollie Brown described, sidewalk to nowhere. And then my concern was that the site plan seemed to be showing it as a sidewalk, but it's actually grassy. So I'm not sure whether city planning was aware, for instance, that there was no sidewalk. But I don't think anyone is saying that you should install, anyone in this board is saying you should install a sidewalk where you're the only sidewalk. But the fact is that the grassy area from finished curb to the property line is publicly owned. And so the planting and so on needs to kind of, I noticed that on the property just at the corner, there are street trees planted in the regularity of the required street trees, as if there had been a sidewalk there, but the sidewalk that was never laid. So it seems like that tradition should be maintained because of the street trees, and I think you're required to have street trees anyway. But the other side of it is what I was talking about. There's this sort of no man's land where the roadway doesn't grow all the way out to its full width to match the curb of the opposing side. And that's what I'm saying. You should continue
Understood.
that.
Okay, so I understand. So you're saying essentially on the east side of Trenton, across from the subject site.
Yes.
So with respect to that area, it's a little bit interesting. This is actually something that I had discussed at times with the architect and the owner. It may not be clear in the most recent street level photographs we submitted, but it is fairly clear from Google Street Views. That area, even though it's not shown on the street trees, there's a massive maple tree in the middle of that street, that like grassy area right there. The property owner doesn't object to issue of paving that last little what I call notch of Trenton, but the issues that come up are a few. First of all, responding to something that Vice Chair Chanda mentioned, generally property owners are responsible for improving the street to the center line plus 5 feet. That's already paved and improved here at Trenton. That little area though, that has this massive maple in it, that tree actually provides a lot of shade for the home that's across the way. They have their pool there. So it becomes a question of what right this current property owner has to pave on that other side. Because the other thing too is, just to even backtrack on this, if the board recalls, originally this was adjourned a few times because we went to the Department of Buildings to see if a general city law 36 application would even be required, because Trenton Court is this unusual status where it's a city-owned street. It's not a CCO street, it's actually title vested to the city. It just never has been mapped. And so we thought that originally that the general city law 36 wouldn't be required, but Department of Buildings maintained it. It did. So that was some of the delay historically originally with this application. Now, the question is, as far as that area across the way, because this is city-owned property, but it's not actually a street, the architect actually had questions as to what right you had to pave over there or improve over there, even if you wanted to take down that large tree. So it is something that was considered. You know, this property owner on their side isn't opposed to doing something like that, but they're not sure how the property owner across the street on the east side of Trenton is going to feel about having this large tree removed from that area. So, you know, I'm not sure if I'm making it clear, but there's definitely been consideration of this and questions as to what the merits of that, you know.
So
would be.
I'm on Street View and I see trees. I'm not sure which trees we're talking about because it's not just, there's several trees. I don't know which one is the.
Right. So the best way I can describe it is if you do the 2D, two-dimensional overhead view, and if you look, there's a large round above ground pool in the home across the street.
Yeah.
Those trees right there that are large trees are actually are in the area that we're talking about, that grassy area that appears now. From our most recent submission, we submitted some street level photos, and those street level photos, I believe it's photo number 1, the first photo, you can see since it's from the ground, it's not very clear, but that tree is actually in the middle of Trenton Court and is that large tree that's shown on the Google photos. The short of it is that there's a tree in the middle of Trenton Court in that area. It could be removed. I don't know what the requirements are as far as because it's city property, because there's a tree there, because the neighbor might want it. We could explore that issue, but again, I'm not sure what the benefit of that would be.
Yeah. I know, I get your point. So, what was I say? The survey that we have doesn't show the trees on that side of the street. It only shows the trees on our side of the street. And it actually shows street trees, by the way, in front of your own client's property, that 50 foot. So I think it assumed that the driveway would be on the far side. And I don't think it's on the far side. But it doesn't show the trees on that other side. What I was mostly concerned about is no place to park, and you got 3 tandem parking places. So maybe there's a way for the architect to locate the trees with a survey of what's across the street and figure out a way to do something where it's like a little cul-de-sac or something. We see that sometimes, right?
Well, with respect to the parking, I can tell you that the current area that's paved right now is wide enough for 2 cars to park. Like if you again look at the street photos where the dead end is there, if 2 individual cars wanted to park there, one could park on both sides of that little dead end area and essentially use it as a two accessory parking spots on a public street.
You're saying like head-in parking?
I'm sorry, was that?
You're saying head-in parking on the?
Yes, they could move in there, head-in parking. It'd be, I can tell you if we had that parking in my neighborhood, I'd be very happy. But it's more than enough space for two cars there at the end of the street because it's 20 feet, a little bit more than 20 feet paved across, and the width of a normal parking spot would be approximately 8 feet. So there's enough space there for 2 cars to park there at the end. The other thing too is, you know, there is other street parking on Trenton Court. There's really, this is not the most highly trafficked area. And I believe between the 3 accessory parking spaces that are proposed and all the street parking on Trenton and Hanover, that's not really.
No, but you see cars parked on, you actually, the reason I was looking at this is because I saw cars parked on Trenton in that area that's sort of that pocket.
Right.
And I thought, oh, they're using the pocket for excess parking and there's no pocket opposite the subject house and there should be a pocket. So maybe So where's your curb? So your curb cut ends up cutting down one of the street trees. No, you don't have any street trees anymore.
The
So you-
proposal is there would be one street tree that is currently in front of the subject site that would be relocated.
It's
There's a
not
fire
shown
hydrant
on
that-
the site plan.
There's a fire hydrant
site-
that would be relocated, and then the one street tree would be relocated.
So
Or not street tree, but one tree would be relocated.
there, the drawing that I'm looking at, which is from, maybe it's too old. 12, no, this is an old one, 12, 19, 18. Let me see if there's a later one.
There have not been many changes to the actual proposed site plan. Most of the additional plans we submitted have been the city planning approved plan, the DEC plan, the topo plans.
Mhm. Oh, here, well, here's a city planning approved plan, but that's not the one that we would be using, right? So the one that we have is, most recent is 12/18, 12/19/18 submission date, right? And it doesn't show any street trees. It doesn't actually match the survey. There are more street trees shown on the survey, but there's no street trees at all shown in front of the site, whereas the survey shows 2. So that needs to be corrected. But what I wanted to say is, if you could perhaps show the head-in parking on the survey, I mean, on the proposed plan, to indicate that that would be a way of accommodating some of those tandems, because it's not going to work with tandems, right?
So to clarify, we would amend this current site plan of record to show that
It's
2 cars could park on the existing paved portion.
Yeah, just to show that it's enough room for 2 cars to park, and there's enough room for a car to back out of the driveway. And now I'd like the fire department also to look at this, because they talked about firefighting, not from right in front of the house, but to the side of the house. So can Chief Daly, I'm not sure whether you have a plan in front of you of this one. Chief Daly, can you hear us? There. Can somebody text him and just see if maybe he's on a call? I would like fire department to comment, because if you have cars parked at the head, then you also have arguably issue with the fire trucks. But at the moment, not having a survey to show where those trees are on the Trenton Court side.
On the
And
east
that-
side.
Yeah, I don't frankly know anything about, this is a DOT issue. If DOT owns the property, it's not up to the owner to say, the owner of the adjacent property to say whether the trees stay or go. I just like trees, so I wouldn't want to cut one down. But we've seen versions of working around trees that might improve that situation, because it's really weird right now.
We don't dispute that. Trenton Court as a whole is an unusual situation, and we're willing to work and explore, what can be done. But, it's because of the unusual nature of the street, that we're even here for the application. And,
Yeah. Well, if it was,
so-
no, I mean, I think if this were a regular city street, they'd probably cut down those trees and, go straight back, right?
Most likely, yes.
Yeah.
So I have a note to show the 2 spaces of parking, and we will also, revisit the issue with the architect as to what options there might be for fully paving the other side, and just see if we can explore something that makes it perhaps a little bit more logical of an arrangement.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, you could have the trees in a tree pit surrounded by curb, something like that. We see that. I mean,
Okay.
I don't want to create like a.
Yeah, I just to make it clear, the property owner is not objecting to any of this. It's just, it's a matter of figuring out what can be done and how it can be done.
Okay, so what I also ask you to do is submit that plan is he here now, Chief Daly?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I had to step away.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you for joining us. I don't know if you have a chance to find the drawing of Trenton Court. You know what we're talking about?
Oh, yes, I do, ma'am. And I know Captain Malloy in our city planning unit is in consultation with DOT on that application. So where they're at with it, I don't know.
Okay, so, but
So
the
the
question that I had, yeah, go ahead, Todd.
No, I apologize. I was going to say, at this point, should we wait till the fire department and DOT have an option? Because, I mean, we can explore things, but if they come back saying, this is what we'd like,
Yeah,
I don't want to work something that's going to have to change if those agencies don't like what we came up with.
right. So I just want to say what I was raising, the issue to Chief Daly. Okay, so the issue is that the current site plan of Trenton Court shows the east curb not continuing down to the edge of Trenton Court and to the end of Trenton Court. And I was saying that means there's no place for on-street parking and for that house that's being developed on that site. And that house has 3-car tandem parking. So obviously the people who live in that house are going to end up parking on the street. Not everybody, some, right? And so where could they park? There's no way to have a clear area to park and then also get into your driveway. So I suggested initially just extending the concrete curb that's on the east side all the way to where that barricade is, the guardrail, and then so squaring off the roadbed. And Mr. Dale said his client doesn't have an objection to doing that. The problem is there are some trees that are growing right in the heart of that. And it'd be a shame to cut the trees down. So that's part of the question. And then the other part of the question is there a way to like work around the trees? That's another question, and still increase the roadbed. And another part of the question is, if you didn't do that, could you then allocate the head of the dead end, or the end of the dead end, for head-in parking for those 2 cars that probably would end up being there? And if so, would that be a problem for fire trucks?
That I do know it will be a problem. They would want to have a cul-de-sac, so they will be able to turn their trucks around after they respond to any emergency at that at proposed premises, because we do not back out. But I'll again go after Captain Malloy and find out what his comments are, so I can get back to Mr. Dale right away so they can explore their options.
Okay, because there's no room for a cul-de-sac. You've only got 25 feet from curb to edge of pavement there. And that's on a good day, because it necks down to being like 20 feet. So there never was a cul-de-sac option. So just to alert that. So, but I appreciate it. If you could go back to Captain Malloy, that would be great.
Madam Chair.
Okay.
So-
Commissioner, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Todd. Just a second.
I think understood. So at this juncture, on this particular issue, I am regularly in contact with Inspector Daly. We'll wait till we get comments back from the fire department before we dig too much into the issue, because we want to let that lead the discussion.
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay.
Commissioner Chanda, she has her hand up, so I just want to hear.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I was going through my notes and in the December hearing, fire department had stated it had no objection, and it had stated that since it was a short dead end street, truck will not be driving to Trenton Court. They will be parked on Hanover, and because there's a fire hydrant right next to the building, they will use that. So I don't know if that position has changed or not, if Chief Daly could update
But
us on
I
that.
think the easier is that they're working with city planning right now, and so let them finish their work. Yeah.
It was I'm sorry. It was the DOT who brought it to our attention of their concerns, and that's to reverse our position. I should have noted that but I apologize for that.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll get with everyone so we don't delay this project any further.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that was thank you, Mr. Dale also. I think that is the only open issue. Mr. Steinhaus, do you have something you wanted to add? No, you're getting ready for public testimony, I can see. Okay. Just 1 second. All right, so I think that that was the only open issue. So now let's invite the public to participate in this.
All right, so if you would like to testify on 2018-198A, please dial 646-558-8656. The meeting ID is 956-1513-7013. And if you call in, please raise your hand using *9 or using Zoom's raise hand feature. And we'll give it about 30 seconds.
Okay, so basically, while we're waiting to see if anyone will call in, what we're doing now is basically waiting for DOT and fire department and city planning to come to some agreement about how to deal with this. And then if there is a submission, Mr. Dale, you're going to have your architect make those necessary changes, right?
Sure. I mean, at this point, from our point of view, we can respond as quickly as possible. So any time frame as far as the next appearance would, I would let Inspector Daly lead, but we'd be able to turn it around quickly. I mean, the other thing too is there may not be anything we need to do because since it is a city street and the city has the right to do what they want to the street, they may choose to move forward with an action outside of the property. So.
Okay. Okay. So more than 30 seconds have elapsed, but Chief Daly, can you give us an idea about how much time? It's just to figure out when the next hearing should be.
I think I would need 3 weeks. I know Captain Lloyd's been dealing with these the open streets, so we've been kind of busy. So I think we need 3 weeks.
Okay, fair. All right. Thank you very much, all of you. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next item is 2018-38, 40 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn.
And I see Mr. Kildoff is already in the room with us.
Miss Building Department is already in the room too.
Yeah, okay. So please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Patrick Kilduff, Tartaprinsky and Drogan, counsel for the applicant. I listened with great interest to the review session earlier this morning. I just, as a threshold matter, just want to make clear that all of our submissions, our appeal submission and our responses to the board have all been made in good faith. This is, we believe, a meritorious appeal, an issue where we have a sign that has existed for many, many decades on the roof of the building of this premises. I'm going to respond to some of the specific questions that were raised. One thing also procedurally, in terms of the adjournment history in this case, again, and as I believe DOB will confirm, the initial hearing on this appeal was adjourned at DOB's request, not at my request. I had consented to that adjournment. I had sought one postponement of this, not two. So in terms of the history and the comments that were made with respect to delay, this is not an issue of someone trying to delay. It's an issue of trying to establish legal non-conforming use status for a sign that dates back at least to the 1940s. With respect to some of the other threshold issues, we had argued that this sign actually had predated the prohibition against signs, advertising signs in proximity to public parks of 1/2 acre or more within the 200 feet. And as a result, that's why we weren't focusing so much on the issue of the calculation. I think Commissioner Chiavetta had raised the point. No, we do not agree with DOB in terms of the computation of the distance. DOB has a computation that puts the size at around 184 feet from McLaughlin Park. We believe it is in excess of 200 feet. I believe the number we had was 217 feet. We will go back and have other photographs and clearer computations made so we can confirm exactly what we believe to be the distance from the park. We believe that to be greater than 200 feet. We take the chair's point that there was a measurement that was based on the light stanchions that extended from the edge, and we don't believe that that's an appropriate point of measurement. Commissioner Otley Brown had raised the point with respect to, well, even if it is more than 200 feet from the park, isn't it problematic because of what I call the sliding scale rule, that once you go beyond 200 feet, the sign can only be increased 1 square foot for every foot of linear distance from the park. That's a provision which came into effect only in 1961. Here we're talking about a use that dates back to at least the 1940s. Also, again, as should be highlighted, this sign was issued a permit as recently as 2003, a permit which was approved and accepted after audit, a permit which remains in full force and effect, which confirmed the legal non-conforming use status of the sign. Now, I understand that there is some discussion and some issue with respect to the interplay between 4255A and 4255C. We will look to address in our submission the applicability of 4255C. Again, as the chair correctly pointed out, the discussion first was focused on 4255C in our initial appeal statement of facts, because that was the section that DOB was relying on at the time. They were saying that there was a failure to comply with 4255C. I think it's correctly stated that in the DOB's more recent submission, the focus has shifted to this 4255A and 4255B argument. Again, in our procedural history in dealing with the sign enforcement unit, that was not the issue that had been raised. Again, our argument was that we had predated the prohibition against park proximity, and that also, as a result, the reference to the Howard Close, it wasn't relevant what the use of Howard Close was, let's say in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, if the park prohibition, if our sign use predated the park prohibition. And as a result, then the non-conforming use would fall when the zoning district changed. This district was zoned in an M district from 1961 up until 2003. And we had shown that at least from 1999 through to the present, we had evidence of continuous use for advertising purposes. And that the only restrictions then on surface area, height above curb, et cetera, for advertising signs outside of the arterial and park restrictions, those only came into effect in 2001. So when you put it all together, and again, we will lay this out again in our submission in response to the board's questions. We had believed that this was non-conforming based on the 2003 change in zoning. If it is that the park restrictions are applicable, we will address that and the interplay with 4255C, which is the traditional grandparenting clause talking about signs in existence pre-1968, which in this case, we're talking about approximately 3,300 square foot signs, so the 1968 provision would apply. And then there's a separate provision which talks about signs up to 1,200 square feet. So again, that's what I think we would be looking to address. So I have it as with respect to the measurement, clear measurement and photographs on the computation, the applicability of 4255C, the sliding scale rule.
Wait. Marjorie, you're muted. Unmute.
Yeah. Sorry. That's why I had to go like that. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to, you're talking really fast, and I want to make sure that it's clear to the commissioners what your position is today, not just what your position will be in papers, right? So the first thing is, you gave us a distance measurement on a really fuzzy version of a Google map where whoever handled the distance measurement wasn't really adept at the technique. So as a result, the distance is measured from who knows where to who knows where, and it actually falls off the page. So you're going to need to use a much more careful measurement system, and I would recommend that you use satellite imagery so we can see exactly from where on the building to where in the park you're measuring, because it should be, of course, the edge of the park, and it should be to the sign face as far as I understand the reading. But it should be with satellite imagery so that we can really see what we're talking about. And I believe that measurement method, and our general counsel is actually the specialist on this. Kurt, you want to jump in?
Just sort of a bird's eye view straight line again, from the edge of the sign face to the edge of the park.
Okay, but in terms of measurement techniques, what do you use for measuring that?
Oh, I mean, there are plenty of mapping tools online. Zola actually has a measurement feature. And so, yes, there are various tools that you can use for measuring. Zola is one of them.
Okay. And Mr. Kildorf, you're familiar with Zola?
I am familiar. Yes, Madam Chair, I'm familiar with Zola.
Okay. All right, so first of all, it needs to be really clear. Second of all, you need to go systematically through, and this is why there was so much criticism of your submission. Department of Buildings goes systematically through their argument, and as they speak, they say, see Exhibit A, see Exhibit B, so we can follow along with the bouncing ball, right? And they don't leave out anything on the timeline. You can't jump around. So the first thing is, and you weren't necessarily aware of this because this was new in DOB's argument, but you need to start with when you're arguing that the sign was installed in 1940 or before that, and then the prohibition against parks, against signs within 200 feet of parks that took place in the 1940s. You need to address the effect of that or the ineffect of that or whatever on your sign. And then you need to address, if we just go in chronological order, the establishment of the Howard clothing store and the sign that's clearly there in a photograph in 1949. And how long was it a Howard clothing store? And how long was that sign up for? Because if it undoes your pre-existing condition of a sign that predates whatever the predate is that you're arguing, either 1968 or 1940, then how do you argue that your sign continues to maintain the non-conforming use, right? Because it sounds to us really like that even if everything else weren't the case, even if there were no prohibition against signs near parks in the 1940s, this became an accessory sign somewhere in the late 1940s and stayed an accessory sign until we don't actually have any official information on when that sign disappeared. And then the next part of it, of course, is there's a requirement in 4255A that says that an existing advertising sign may not be structurally altered. So we have that photograph of the Howard clothing sign with all of its structure. It's a very elaborately structured sign. If that sign was in place in 1968, that's the sign that you need to have retained. That's the structure you need to have retained. Otherwise, it was structurally altered. And I'm not sure that photographic evidence will support that. You need to go through all the tests, right? Unless you're saying that the sign didn't become non-conforming until 2003, you have to explain to us, why didn't it become non-conforming until 2003? What happened to all of those other things that happened along the way in the 1960s with respect to the zoning resolution? Okay, do you understand? So
Yeah, no, I understand your point on that, Madam Chair. Again, our argument had originally been tied to the 2003 zoning change from the M district to the C district, again, because we believe that we were completely outside of the park proximity regulations. So that's what we'll address, the applicability of the park proximity regulations, and then fill that in with the history, specifically with regard to these comments with respect to Howard clothes and how that sign was used during that.
And actually, I want to say both for DOB and for the appellant, since this is a valuable property interest, as we always talk about with signs, right? One way to really know the exact distance is hire a surveyor, right?
That actually,
measure guys, right?
Madam Chair, that's exactly what I'm recommending to our client, that they hire a surveyor.
Okay. Okay. So Commissioner Shanda had her hand up, and then you can proceed.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Kilduff. First of all, with regards to section 4255, and I don't know why you are using 2000 as the cutoff point, because a 2000 text amendment that happened, it really specifically happened to section 42-55C, more with regards to the arterial highway. It really did not change anything with regards to A and B, which had to do with proximity to public park. So I think that's why we are saying you need to go to 60s when the zoning regulation, because the zoning was in 1961 zoning regulation, this prohibition was there for manufacturing districts. I'm not going to commercial. In manufacturing district, the same language existed. And I think you need to provide documents of the zoning regulation sections. And this is for DOB, for both of you to convince that the regulations that was in place at the time of the 1961, 1968, 1940, and how the language still remained consistent with that in manufacturing district, and you need to prove it as one way or the other. Did it remain consistent or did it change? From 1950s onwards all the way. I think 2000 is not relevant. It would only be if it were talking about arterial highway, and we have eliminated that. We are only looking at the proximity to the parks.
Right.
So that's that is one. I had one question for Mr. Kilduff. In your documents, you had referred to a 1940 tax photo. And I think since the time the application has been filed till date, I'm assuming you probably now have access to that 1940 tax photo. So if you can provide that, because that will only help your argument to indicate that the Howard Clothes line was there, which I find it hard to believe because Howard Clothes didn't purchase that building until 1944. So either it was using it as a business, as an advertising sign and not as an accessory sign. And at some point it became an accessory sign. Then you had also just now referred to a successful audit of 2003. If you can provide the documents related to that and explain what was in that 2003 audit and what, because we are just going by your word. We just need to know what was audited and the documents are relevant to it. And just a question, was the roof sign ever included in any of the certificate of occupancy?
That I would have to check, Vice Chair. I don't have that information at the ready, but I will make a note to check whether the roof sign was included in the C of O.
Okay.
So, and I just want to pick up on some of those comments. If you determine in your measurement with the surveyor, and I see Commissioner Otley Brown's hand up, if you determine from the surveyor that the sign is further than 200 feet from the edge of the park, measured from the face of the sign, then you need to say, because it isn't within 200 feet, then what? Then it is non-conforming because of the following, and then take us systematically through. Because the first series of arguments has to do with proximity to the park. The next series of arguments has to do with, okay, it's 201 feet from the park. Therefore, the following sections don't apply to me. And the issue of proximity to the park only comes into effect when 4255A, 4255B is enacted, right? But we predate that, right? Therefore, it doesn't have to do with us, assuming you predate it. And of course, the constant theme here is the Howard Clothes accessory use. And did it stop being an accessory use in time prior to 1968, right? Okay, so Commissioner Otley Brown.
I just wanted to say that I was doubtful of the appellate's ability to prove that an advertising sign was in place before 1940, when DOB has already put forth photos from 1939 on that don't show a rooftop sign at the subject site. And the first proof of a rooftop sign is in 1949, and at that point it was an accessory business sign for Howard's Clothes, which purchased the site in 1944. So I really don't have any confidence that this could be proven.
I agree with Commissioner Otley Brown, but I would like to give the benefit of the doubt to Mr. Kilduff to be able to respond to those questions.
Agreed. You know, that in fairness to the appellant, they've never had a chance to look at this DOB material, which was submitted very recently. So they should have an opportunity to respond. Commissioner Sheta?
Thank you, Chair. Since they're gonna be doing survey, can we get like a measurement for the sign face itself?
What do you mean?
Like the exact measurements of the sign face?
So the height and width of the sign face.
Yes, and do not forget to measure the setback of the sign from the face of the building,
Okay.
because that could be like one of the debating points too.
Did you get that, Mr. Kildall?
The sign face measurement and I'm sorry, some of it caught.
The second one,
cut out a little bit.
the sign face setback from the face of the building.
The sign face measurement and the sign face setback from the face of the building.
Well,
Yes.
face of the building or I mean, they're going to end up measuring from the edge of the parapet, right, which hangs over. This has a cornice, so you're going to be measuring from the cornice line, right? Yeah, it's a little tricky. So maybe that's what you're doing. We want some precision. So measuring from the cornice line to the sign face, and then tell us the distance of the cornice line to the building face.
And if they can provide some pictures as well, that would be helpful.
Cornice line to sign face and cornice line to building face?
Yeah.
In addition to surface area, of the sign, and then the setback from the face of the building.
Yes.
Yes, and give us some pictures for the conditions at the top, like of the sign, so we can visually like see what we're looking at on the drawings.
Mm-hmm. And then as to the question of the structure, if the argument is that the structure that held the Howard clothes sign is the structure that needs to be the same structure as existed in 1968, then you need to establish that it's the same structure that exists today. Otherwise, you don't comply with the regulations if it's within proximity of the park, right?
Well, again, Madam Chair, I think we'd still have those same issues with respect to minor modifications or safety-related work that's done to the structure. I mean, again, as we've argued in the case from yesterday, that the structure itself doesn't stay in amber if this is one from the 1930s or 40s.
Right.
But yes, we'll address that.
We're not talking about amber. We're talking about that Howard sign is enormous, right? And so if the sign is a lot less than the original Howard enormity, then the sign, the structure arguably was structurally altered or even completely reconstructed. And so the more information you can give us to refute that potential assumption, the better off you will be.
Yes, and we believe that it did retain its enormity, but we will provide that.
Okay. And Commissioner Shibata.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to have council know that I too agree. I think that the fact that this is or seemed to be an accessory sign for a period of time, that's going to be that may be fact dispositive here, and that right now is one of my largest concerns.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else you want to add, Mr. Kilgore?
And not at this time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so Department of Buildings.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Michael Walker, Assistant General Counsel with the Department of Buildings. This case concerns a sign located within 200 feet of the park, north of the building. The building is north of McLaughlin Park and is within 200 feet of the building. It's not disputed that McLaughlin Park is a public park, more than 1/2 acre in size, and that the sign is in view of such park. Advertising signs have been unlawful within 200 feet of and in view of a public park of 1/2 acre or more since May 29, 1940, per section 21B of the 1940 zoning resolution. Therefore, the sign cannot be lawfully non-conforming unless it existed as an advertising sign as of May 29, 1940. The applicant claims that the advertising sign existed before 1940 and therefore is not conforming. In support, the applicant presented a sign permit from 1921. However, the evidence shows otherwise. I'd like to share my screen here. I'm not sure how to do that. Oh, here we go. Okay. So we have here the figure from 1939 showing that there was no sign on the roof. And then we have the picture from 1945 showing that there was no sign on the roof in 1945. So even if...
Oh, wait a second. Where's the build? You know, it's the building is really far away, right?
Sure. Let me zoom in here. So here is the building just right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but
yes.
Okay. And as you can see on the roof that there was no sign, and this is 1945. So even if the sign was on the roof in 1921, the presumption is that there was no sign on the roof in 1940, based on the fact that it was not there in 1939 and also not there in 1945. And the applicant has not rebutted that evidence. The applicant claims, however, that the sign is 217.28 feet and not within 200 feet of the park, of McLaughlin Park. The distance from the building line to the lot line of McLaughlin Park per Cyclomedia is 184.6 feet. In the applicant's February 28, 2018 submission, Exhibit B shows that the sign front is set back 10 feet and 5 inches from the edge of the building. So taking the 184.6 feet from the Cyclomedia measurement, plus the applicant's exhibit setback measurement of 10.5 feet, we're still within 200 feet from the park at 195.1 feet. However, even if the advertising sign were measured at 217.28 linear feet from the park, it would still not be lawful. Zoning resolution section 4255 limits the surface area of advertising sign to no more than its linear distance to the park, which would be 217.28 feet. The sign at issue has a surface area of 3,360 square feet. Therefore, a sign of this size would have to be set back 3,360 feet from the public park and could not have been lawful unless it existed as an advertising sign as of December 15, 1961. The only sign before 1961 is a sign that says Howard Close from 1949. However, any Howard Close sign existing on the building while Howard Close owned or occupied the premises would be accessory to the Howard Close use on that zoning line. Based on the evidence, Howard Close was the owner or tenant of the building from 1944 to at least 1971, based on a 1944 New York Times article that Howard Close purchased the subject building in 1944, and from ACRA's records showing that Howard Close transferred deed to another entity in 1971. The sign therefore directed attention to a use on the zoning line and did not meet the then advertising sign definition in Zoning Resolution 1210, which defines an advertising sign as one that directs attention to a business, profession, commodity, service, or entertainment conducted, sold, or offered elsewhere than upon the same zoning line, and is not accessory to a use located on that zoning line. Since there is no evidence presented of Howard Close existing off the zoning lot, and there is evidence that Howard Close business was located on the zoning lot, the Howard Close sign was an accessory sign and not an advertising sign on December 15, 1961, and could not have become lawful nonconforming advertising sign at any time or point thereafter.
Sorry, just a question before you go on. You said you weren't able to find any photographs prior to 1961 of this building, or prior to 1971 of this building?
Right. From my search, I found various pictures, but pictures that were verifiably on a particular date. Really, the only one is, I think, the 1949 tax photo that is in the submission. And then until then, there's kind of there's just a long period where there isn't really documentary evidence of the sign on the roof that I found.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. You can continue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh. We have not gone into the issue of discontinuance of non-conforming advertising sign at the premises because we believe there's no evidence that an advertising sign existed as of December 15, 1961. If, however, the board should find that the sign existed as lawful advertising in 1961, on December 15, 1961, the department would like the opportunity to brief the board on whether such non-conforming use was discontinued after 1961. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Sheta, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the Department of Building for the briefness of the information. And I would like to get a copy of the imagery that you just showed us, but not copied and pasted in like your statement. We want to get like the image file itself, so we're going to be able to zoom in and out like you just did.
Yeah.
The other thing is, my understanding from what you just said is you're concluding that the sign was not an advertising sign because one of the images show that it advertises something that's related to Howard Close at a time that this firm or company bought the building. Do you know whether at that time the sign was owned by the same company or it might be owned by somebody else? Was it sold as part of the building?
I'm not familiar with the terms. I only looked at the picture during that period. I have the 1945 picture where there was no sign on the roof, followed by the New York Times, well, or around that same time, the New York Times article explains that Howard Close bought that building. Then in 1949, a sign with the words Howard Close appeared on the top of the building, but I don't have any details specific to the transaction.
The reason I'm asking is my understanding, sometimes the owner of the building could be different from the owner of the site. So if I'm an owner of a building and I have a sign that's owned by somebody else on top of my building, and I do have a business in the building and I want to advertise, I believe it makes sense to advertise on the sign on top of my building. And if I do so, and the sign could be an advertising one, but because of the fact that I advertise on it, it could be considered an accessory sign. Is not correct, right?
Right.
No, it is an accessory sign, because what the issue is what does the sign say and what goes on inside the building? If they're the same, it's an accessory sign. Whether you as the building owner decided to pay outdoor media to post the sign, that's your business. And in fact, we've had cases like that where an outdoor advertising company is in charge of a sign, but it is an accessory sign. The outdoor advertising company maintains the structure, maintains the billboard, all that. Mr. Steinhaus, did you want to add something to that?
No, I was just gonna say that it has to do with the on-site use and what's being advertised and the relationship between the two.
Right. But what it could mean is that at some point there's a falling out with Howard Clothes, or they stop paying the outdoor advertising company, and the next thing you know, it says Coca-Cola. But then it switches to being an advertising sign, and now you have a problem with the Department of Buildings if you weren't grandparented. Right. Okay. Anything you want to add, Mr. Walker?
I would just say that what Commissioner Shitta's hypothetical, I would just ask the appellant to, if they would be able to provide any more insight into the activities that were occurring at the building, because if they are able to prove that the sign was advertising, we would be open to review that evidence.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Shonda.
Yeah, I just came across a photo from 1971, which is, sorry, when I want it to work, it does not work.
This is from your online research?
Yeah, just now.
Okay.
And it says Parade of Progress, Standard Union, Thursday, June 18. I think it's 19, maybe it's not 1971. It's even older.
Can you tell us what's the website you're at?
I'm looking at consumergrouch.com.
Oh, yeah.
And in that, it does show a building. Now, I don't know if it's a photo or if it's a rendering, but it shows a sign. But the sign just says Howard's 20 Seconds Clothes Factory. And it's very different from the structure of the photo, even that was there in some of the others. So
I think that's a drawing, actually. I saw
think
that
that's a drawing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's when you just search the history of the Howard clothing.
Yeah.
And Consumer Grouch has this little tribute. This is where I was talking about one of the descendants of the Howard clothing family put together this little blog. So the Parade of Progress is a drawing, right?
Yeah.
So you can't go by a drawing. That's like, maybe that's that's the artist's rendering of what the factory never ended up looking like. So anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I have a question. Actually, I do have a question for Mr. Walker. And that is, this is bunch of hypothetical questions that's leading to this. So as I mentioned, there is a building that is under construction between the subject site and the park. And it is going to block a good amount of the view, unless you're at a specific angle. If let's say if it is proven that this sign was a non-conforming, legally non-conforming sign, can the sign be relocated to be facing Flatbush Avenue extension?
That's something I would like to have the opportunity to respond to in writing. If that
Okay, sure.
you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't think we have any other comments. We invite the public, even though this is an appeal, right? So please invite the public.
Right. If you would like to speak on this application, which is 2018-30A, related to 40 Flatbush Avenue Extension, please call 646-558-8656. And the meeting ID is 941-1217 and 8179. Excuse me, I think this, sorry, my computer crashed and that was the wrong meeting information. The meeting ID is 956-1513 7013. So please call in. And if you would like to speak on this by telephone, please raise your hand using *9 or Zoom's raise hand feature. Although we have no attendees, so if you call in, we will presume that you would like to speak about 2018 30A.
Okay, and in the meantime, Mr. Kildorf, how much time do you need to respond to this?
Could I have until, at least the last,
Sorry, you cut off. Say again.
sorry, could I have until early October?
Early October to submit?
Yes.
Okay, let's see, that's the month of September. All right, is that fair for you, DOB? And then how much time do you need to respond to them?
You're muted, Mr. Walker.
You're muted, unmute yourself.
My apologies. The standard 3 weeks would be fine for the department.
Okay, and 2 weeks to respond for SIR reply, right?
Yeah. Yes, please, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is 2017-34BZ, 311 Adams Street, Staten Island.
Good afternoon, Todd Dale for the applicant. So I did listen to review session and the
Wait. Was your architect and?
they're not available.
Oh, okay.
I was going to speak to that, but do I need to be sworn in because it's a BZ?
Yeah, that's what I want to do, but I thought maybe your architect and engineer were coming or something? Okay. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this board and to respond honestly to board member questions?
I do affirm. Again, Todd Dale for the applicant. I did listen to review session and can respond to comments that were raised. First, with respect to the architect and engineer, I personally had actually registered them on the hopes that they would be able to make it. The lead engineer is literally traveling back from vacation today, so it couldn't even dial in remotely. And the plan drafter is tied up with another appointment that could not be changed. So, we did receive notice from Ms. Prenga on Friday with the request for them to attend, and we did try and arrange it on the short notice, but it wasn't possible. We will make sure that they're available for the next appearance. Okay. And I know that dates aren't assigned, during this particular hearing, but I do know that we're given a chance to review dates generally. We'll make sure that we can coordinate with Ms. Prenga to make sure they're available for the next appearance.
So just at this point, at the last hearing, we said, bring your architect. Why is this coming as a surprise to bring an architect?
Not a surprise. My notes from the last hearing, and actually when I listened to it, didn't say anything about bringing an architect. The primary issues that were discussed at the previous hearing are actually more legal than plan related, and that's what our latest response addressed. There were a lot of questions that were raised today with respect to the plan of design, which I think are all fair and legitimate questions, and we want to respond to them. But a lot of them were being raised for the very first time today. Material designs, the request for information about balconies, talking about different plan designs, the lateral sections, things of that sort.
Okay. I don't want to go through this. No more cases where the architect doesn't come, none. And in this case, also bring the client, okay? No more cases without the architect. Just tell the architect, it's a Zoom hearing. It's not like they have to get on a plane and fly here or take a train or anything. All they have to do is be near a telephone. So
that's fair, but if you're actually in the process of traveling, it's difficult to Zoom. So, I understand what you're saying, but it's not always as simple as you make it out to be,
okay,
especially in short notice.
Well, it is pretty simple because you can also work your way around this, right? You can also say to our project manager, I can't make the 10 a.m. Can we move this to the 2 p.m. to accommodate flight arrivals or things like that, right? So
and I understand it's fair. We'll have somebody. I just want to make make that very clear. But it's also, as I said, a lot of these, I listened to the last hearing videos I have a practice of trying to do before new hearings. And a lot of these issues are being brought up for the first time. They're fair questions and we'll endeavor to respond them, but it's not as if these have been,
Right,
ongoing questions.
But
And
the,
with respect to
point-
the architect,
the point of always having the architect here in the hearings is because the architect is the designer of the building. You are not. And so the only person who can respond to design comments really, or really anything to do with the building, is the architect. And so there should be no hearings that you come to without the architect. It's really not, it just delays the process. It makes us just go on and on forever. And it's not just this case, it's many cases. There's no reason not, okay? So let's not go into what the reasons were and weren't going forward. All your cases, bring the architect, have them ready to call in, okay?
That's fine. And also, just to expand a little bit upon the history, as was mentioned, this is the second design team that was involved with this. Part of the delay with the original is that if the board recalls, the original plans were all hand-drawn plans. That particular architect doesn't engage in the flood review that was required. So that's why the new professional team was required to go. And we went through the requested and required flood review and adjusted the plans accordingly. So just want to clarify that that's, this application has been pending for some time, but those are the circumstances behind it. And obviously we're dealing with the COVID issue, but we'll make sure everybody's here. The property owner has been made very aware of all the issues and questions that have come up, and we'll make sure that he is very aware of the next hearing date when it's set up, okay? The vast majority of these questions, as discussed, are very specific to the plan and design. I'm happy to respond to particular issues, but it seems as if this really should be adjourned for a future appearance so we can address those issues. I've made a long list. I'll listen to the review session again for those particular points. We'll adjust the plans accordingly and have people here prepared to address those questions at the next, hearing. But from a legal perspective, I don't know if there were any questions about the legal items that were submitted. It does seem like it's more plan and design related.
Right, okay. All right, let's just do that then. And again, be careful with the term adjourn. You're appearing, so it's not an adjournment, okay? Adjournments look bad. So what we're doing is we're allowing you to respond to our comments with changes to the drawings. And we expect to see changes to the drawings in response. We don't expect, and please don't have them make excuses for why they can't change them. Instead, they must change them to respond, in particular to the issue of height. The building is very tall for the neighborhood and it has to come down. There's no reason for this huge attic. So you could lop off 5 feet from the attic without even noticing in terms of the, in terms of function. There's nothing going on in the attic according to the drawings. And so the roof needs to be just topped off by a minimum of 5 feet. And then in terms of mitigation elements, there isn't a discussion about how they can't comply with the mitigation. They have to provide some version of a mitigation element, even if it doesn't meet the full language of the text. And they should be eliminating a lot of the parking waiver requirements or the curb waiver requirements by finding an alternate way to park a car. That's just a direction, and I don't want to hear excuses about how they studied it and they can't do it. The architect has to know that the project that basically just got copied over from the last architect is not the project. It's just yeah, that the project has to change in its design, and if it means a complete redesign, so be it, okay? Just to be clear. All right, any other comments from commissioners? Okay, so can we invite public to attend? I don't think we have any, but go ahead.
So if you would like to speak on calendar number 2017-34BZ, which relates to 311 Adams Avenue, Staten Island, please dial 646-558-8656 with the meeting ID 956-1513-7013. And if you're calling in by telephone, please raise your hand, although nobody is in attendance right now. So we will presume that you would like to speak about 2017-34 BZ. Thank you.
Okay, it's actually been 30 seconds, so I want to give the architect enough time to respond to this direction to redesign the building, basically. So Mr. Dale, what do we say, 2 months to redesign?
I believe that the questions that were asked are plan related that we could submit within 4 to 5 weeks. I don't know what the board's calendar is based on that. The one thing I would say is I do know it's been the board's practice and it's appreciated, but just to confirm that before the specific date is assigned, that we'll get a message because I want to confirm attendance.
Okay, yes, that's true. Okay, but again, it's not just picking up a few little changes, hear me clearly, right? It's likely a major redesign of the house in order to be able to eliminate some of the waivers and to respond to criticism about the building height significantly changing and the parking significantly changing, the curb cut location significantly changing, et cetera. Okay, so
understood. And you know, based on all these comments made, is that we'll make the changes to the plans, or I believe as also was said with respect to 6461, if complete removal of waiver can't be done, a clear explanation as to what has been done and why the remainder couldn't be done.
right. Well, I just want to make it clear about 6461. For example, it has a requirement to have a porch, right? So, and let me see if I can actually get that specific requirement. So it says, porch. Where provided as a mitigating element, a porch shall have a finished floor at least 6 inches below the lowest occupiable floor and a width at least 70% of the aggregate width of all street walls with 25 feet of the street line. The depth of the porch must be at least 5 feet and the porch may not be closer to the street line than 5 feet. So you could actually have something that looks like a porch that functions instead like a Juliet balcony or something like that. And comply closely with that, even if it doesn't end up being 70%, or even if it doesn't end up being within 5 feet deep, things like that. But you could have something that is porch-like that deals with that first mitigation element as an example. In this case, the staircase is shown as being inside the house as opposed to outside the house. If the house were redesigned, you might actually have the staircase on the outside and then you would have that switch staircase opportunity. I don't know if there's any place to put it because the stair is supposed to be in front of the house, right? A raised front yard. So it talks about the height of the raised front yard. There's kind of no reason why a front yard couldn't be raised, but it's not going to be able to meet the grade level that's required in this mitigation provision. So maybe it's raised in a different way. I mean, all of those things are in an effort to reduce the apparent height of that first floor, or which isn't called the first floor. And then the other one is trees or shrubs that are at least 3 feet high. No reason why that couldn't be complied with, right? And I'm not saying that it complies to the letter, but there's certainly ways of using all of these elements to affect the design. Okay.
So yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, as far as addressing the waivers point by point and eliminating them to the best, to the greatest extent possible.
Okay, good. All right then. So thank you. So I'll keep in mind 6 weeks to submit and we'll see what we can do. Okay, thank you.
Okay, this concludes the public review, the public hearing for August 11th, 10 a.m. session. We'll resume at 2 p.m.
Okay, thank you, everyone. See you later.